All right, guys, welcome back to 4th and Long, episode 3. For those of you who were wondering where our last episode was, I guess you could say it was COVID related. And for those of you who watched the South Park episode, you'll find that term rather amusing. But here we are, and of course, we're trying to get a lot to take underway. But it's a pretty close week this week, and it's starting off with a Thursday night matchup. Screaming Beavers versus Jägermeisters, the two podcast guys. It's pretty tight, Randy. Here we are at halftime. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I think we're the two guys that have the most players in this Thursday game. So yeah, we'll see how the clock goes when it comes to when we get this podcast done, so we can go back to the game.
Absolutely. So let's just get right into it then. Obviously, like we said, we were away for a little bit there, but COVID 19 has created some issues, as we all know. That let's just backtrack in time to the start of the year here to start this episode off. Obviously, we weren't even sure if we were going to have an NFL season due to the pandemic, and of course, what the NFL said was we're going to come back, but we're not going to have preseason. So, Randy, where does it kind of start off here, just from a fantasy perspective, not having a preseason? How does that really change your dynamic?
The biggest change that I find is that it's with the rookies, especially. I think this year was the year a lot of guys in the league watched the draft. I know I watched the draft, or at least the first two rounds for the most part. We were really paying attention to these rookies. Normally, that's when these rookies that may or may not make the team, or may not start defining their role in an offense or a defense, as it were, but mostly in an offense because this is fantasy. It's offensively driven. Uh, this is where you see whether they're going to actually be the second receiver, third receiver, whether they're the backup running back, whether they can take over the running back at the starting position. You kind of get to see this, but we jumped right into the season and we kind of had to guess, and there were a lot of good rookies being selected. I picked a rookie, and fortunately, CD Lamb is even though he's technically the third receiver, is doing some good numbers there for the Cowboys. But you never know. I was fully prepared to rest CD Lamb to have him on the bench and just watch him for the first half of the season because you don't know. We don't have that preseason to watch what he was doing. That's just an example that I had.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, obviously, the rookies is a big topic for me. I think what I find is, obviously, in the preseason, we have, well, I've made it clear multiple times, I hate drafting before the end of the preseason due to the major fact that we've seen this year blow up worse than ever that I can remember fantasy wise is injuries. I think just getting the body back for these guys from the off season onto the field, getting in contact, getting into the game mode. If there's an injury, it does happen, but I am very surprised at how many injuries there are. And you got to wonder, are these injuries going to happen anyway this year? Or was it due to the fact that they didn't have opportunities to practice on those fields and get back into the game mode, and you're down a little while? And I mean, these guys are freak athletes, but did the muscle memory not be there on those certain cuts or those blocks or those jumps or the push offs? And like we said in the last episode, I think we had 7 ACL tears so far. I think since then, I mean, thankfully Chubb didn't tear anything, but he sprained something. OJ Howard tore his Achilles. Eckler had a sprain. These injuries seem to be happening at a freak rate. And for those of you, to your point, who took the rookies, who you're normally saying, like, I don't think I'd play him till halfway through, you're forced to play him right away, and you're going to find out a true fantasy value. So for me, I think one of the biggest, the hardest part of this year has been not being able to see what everybody's been able to do. And when you have all those injuries right away, I don't know how you come back from that. Obviously, everybody's adjusting to it, but injuries seem to be a big ticket for me for not having the preseason.
That is for sure. It's been a theme of this season, particularly a lot of the skilled players. Not so many quarterbacks. That's probably a bit of a blessing because at least most of us can rely on our quarterbacks to be healthy every week. But yeah, running backs, wide receivers. I mean, I've been very lucky. I've had hardly any injuries. Well, I don't have any injured players, not even questionables on my lineup at the moment. I've had a couple questionables early in the first few weeks, but like nothing for me. And you have tons of guys on IR, and other guys have tons of guys on IR. That's just a that's just a reality for this season. And yeah, you're right. Missing the preseason probably has something to do with that.
So that's going back, like we said, to the start of the year for the preseason. Obviously, we've had 4 weeks underway. We're just getting into the start of the bye weeks, week 5 here. Another thing to consider is, as we've seen, Pittsburgh did not play a game, nor did the Titans, due to the COVID outbreak. Obviously, that one we got a bit more heads up on for fantasy wise, but still, you have to plan for that. We've made the change in 4th and long, listening to everybody, to add the third waiver wire pickup. But across the board, just generalized in fantasy, what's your thoughts on roster spots and, of course, the IR, due to the unpredictability of when a guy could become positive?
Yeah, that's just the kind of thing where you kind of have to be prepared for almost anything, really. I mean, all sorts of different aspects come into it. Like as you know, like I mentioned with the rookies, if you're going to take a chance on a rookie, you might not want to now, unless you think that rookie will take over for an injured player or something like that. But it's like, yeah, you're gonna like usually when an offensive player goes down, I'm sure a lot of the guys in the league are checking the waiver wire to see who's next on the depth chart and are they worth picking up. And most people at least look into it. That's going to be ramped up to 11 here as we go forward. And as now it's not just getting hurt. It's like one guy on your team, maybe on special teams or on the defense, doesn't even meet you most of the time. You're not in meetings with them and stuff like that. All of a sudden they get COVID, and all of a sudden the whole team, and then the other team gets shut down. So it might not even be your team break, you know, with guys breaking curfew or breaking the rules or whatever. That could throw the whole game out. So it just has a very widespreading, a wide net. Well, sort of like an injury. It has the same effect of an injury. You're missing the game, or the game gets postponed, and it affects a lot of people at once. So we got to be prepared for almost anything, and that's where the third ad per week. Um, uh, that's why so many guys liked it, not just because they want to use up all three a week, but they want to have one in their pocket because anything could happen.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, I'm glad everybody chimed in, and we made the decision we did due to this. Another thing to think of is, sometimes when you're playing a guy and you look at their roster, it's like, man, I got a juicy matchup. Like, let's just say, for example, we got Dak Prescott, Dallas versus the Giants. Okay, the Giants are terrible. This is a really good matchup for my quarterback to go out there and get me the points so I can beat this guy, because maybe his roster is a bit better than mine, right? But my quarterback has that matchup. All of a sudden now, Dallas and the Giants don't play due to COVID. You might lose that matchup because your favorable matchup isn't going to take place. So moving forward, it's going to be very interesting to see, just if games are postponed, like that Pittsburgh Tennessee game. If we have more of those, it's going to be interesting to the effect it's going to have on fantasy matchups, because again, I just speak to, hey, this is the week I got this guy's got like terrible defenses and they're just crappy against the run, and oh look, he doesn't play. Now I have to put in a scrub that might have a really good run defense that he might be up against, who I didn't want to play this week. And I think the matchup portion can really make or break a few people, depending on who you got, and of course what the COVID situation is like. So with that being said, we just wanted to touch base on what maybe COVID is doing. Fantasy football wise, we've all seen it. We're watching reports every time somebody comes up with something. It's being tagged on the Facebook group, and yeah, just keep watching for it, guys. Our only advice is do what you can, and trades are still available, right? So everybody's going to get affected by it. Hopefully, not too bad, and that's why we have that stuff. To make those moves. But enough about the pandemic. Let's talk about some actual fantasy stuff here. So we're just gonna switch it up here a little bit. We're gonna actually discuss who we think has been a fantasy. Let's start with the fantasy star. Randy, who have you been most impressed with fantasy wise so far this year?
I've been pretty surprised with this kid James Robinson, running back for Jacksonville. Obviously, with Fournette kind of being showed the door there right towards the end of the off season, it was kind of a surprise. A lot of people weren't really looking into this guy for fantasy, obviously because Fournette. They were assuming Fournette was just going to get the ball a lot in Jacksonville, and with Minshew kind of starting a bit, actually starting the full season, it was looking like the offense might be a little bit better, but it wasn't that great. I mean, Chark is, he's an okay wide receiver, but it was still going to center around Fournette. But now all of a sudden he's gone. Who's the next guy up? Well, James Robinson has taken that starting job. He's actually done quite well. I've been pretty impressed with him. He's been kind of a surprise out of nowhere, and he's done well.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of options really there for that team. I mean, Gardner Minshew was kind of like that needle in a haystack, or that diamond in the rough, so to speak, last year. But he hasn't really been Gardner Minshew of 2019. So, like you say, you lose Fournette. You're thinking, well, who the hell do they have? And yeah, that James Robertson, man, I know I've tried to actually trade for him a couple times. I think Connor Roll has him, and what we all look for, especially to what we just previously spoke about with injuries, running backs have been the major issue. And if you can find one that's doing something as a starting kind of RB1 for a team, you got a good guy. And out of nowhere, here's this guy from Jacksonville. So no, I totally see where you're coming from with that pick for sure. For my pick, and I think you're gonna like this because I've had him before, and I've just never seen him do what he's been doing. And it pains me to say this, but so far my fantasy surprise has been Dak Prescott. The guy is absolutely lighting out. Now they are 1-3, but we're not here to talk about actual records. We're talking about fantasy. He's got 1,600, almost 1,700 yards in passing with 9 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and 9 sacks. That puts him he's the third highest scoring player in fantasy so far. And like I said, he's got a juicy matchup this week against the Giants. But listen to these points: 18, okay, tough game against the Rams. 41, 34, 44. He's on pace for like 6,500, 6,700 yards apparently. That's ridiculous. Fantasy wise, this guy is just having a monster first quarter, and New York has given up the seventh fewest points to quarterbacks. But I wouldn't be surprised. Dallas is on a mission here. They gotta take that crappy division that we're both in by the horns, because the Giants aren't going to do it, and Dak can keep rolling. So Walter Sobchak, he's got to be happy with that quarterback, because normally Dak really isn't on anybody's radar. If you get him, great, because they usually focus their offense around Zeke. And even now, you got to be happy with CD Lamb's production because your quarterback's throwing the ball.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I will agree with you. He's probably the best fantasy player, uh, at least so far this year, just because they've had to throw the ball so much. Uh, the only part where I wouldn't have mentioned him was just because I was expecting him not to be this great, but I was still expecting him to do very well, just because he's been a good fantasy quarterback the last couple of years. He's got a lot better at that. But yeah, I can definitely see where nobody expected him to reach this height.
So, if there's an up, there's a down. Who in this first quarter of the season, fantasy wise, has just disappointed you? Who's not on? Who doesn't make? Who's not standing out in your eyes?
This list was considerably longer than my list of surprises, as I'm sure most people can probably agree with. Obviously, I'll just do some honorable mentions for some guys on my team, like Emmanuel Sanders. We all thought he would take off after the Michael Thomas injury. I tried to shop around to some people, and I didn't get a good enough deal for him. Uh, kind of wish I had gotten rid of him, because other than a couple touchdowns, I mean, I know last week he had a good game, but like the very first game after Thomas gets injured and he gets like 2 targets, I'm like, what kind of stuff is that? Obviously, Austin Hooper, my tight end. The Browns gave him 11 million, and now they don't use him. They basically pay him 11 million bucks to block, and that's no good fantasy wise. Julio Jones has been a disappointment after week one. That's a big one. I almost made him first, but I don't think he'll stay down for long. He'll still bounce back as long as he gets those nagging injuries out of the way. But my big disappointment is the Vikings defense. Now,
Ooh, okay.
a lot of people can say things like, "Well, yeah, we knew that they lost Everson Griffin. Obviously, he went to my Cowboys. Uh, they lost uh, that that one. I think he was a safety, Sendeo,
Yep, yep.
and I think did they lose Xavier Rhodes too? I think they lost him as well. So they lost quite a few big players on that defense, but they were still drafted reasonably high. Uh, Part of it might be the Green Bay Packer offense decided to take a big step forward this year. But yeah, that defense has not been that defense has been almost as bad as the Cowboys, to be honest with you.
Yeah, no, I mean you got some good mentions there. For the one I totally agree with you on, and that was actually the guy I was going to start my portion of this segment off with is Julio Jones. And we're gonna do another section here in a little bit, so I'm not gonna say too much, but definitely Julio. He's up there for me. I think another one that I praised you nonstop for this pick in the draft, and I know we're only 4 games in, but according to the strength of the schedules leading up to the year, I thought for sure you stole an unreal running back to complement Zeke and Cook, and that's in Montgomery, who's playing for you tonight. Um,
Mm-hmm.
they have Chicago's reportedly had the easiest run schedule in the league, with a pretty decent defense that can get you back onto the field. Yes, Trubisky, whatever, but that doesn't affect the run game, so to speak. But so far, only 218 yards rushing. He's got only one touchdown, and it was a receiving touchdown. So,
Yeah, yeah. He just got his first rushing touchdown tonight, right
right,
before we recorded this.
but that's also the Bears' first rushing touchdown of the year as well.
Yeah.
So it kind of goes to speak that I really thought that was a guy who could have maybe jumped off the page at an additional running back, maybe three, so to speak, because most of us kept RB top two people. So he was kind of a disappointment to me too. I mean, he's only sitting at 39 fantasy points. I mean, you look at that. Singletary is only off by a little bit of him. Raheem Mostert, who's barely played, is at 37. Ronald Jones, who came out of nowhere, is at 37. And then you have Miles Sanders at 35, Malcolm Brown 35. I'm just kind of shocked that with that particular system, with that schedule, Montgomery is. I don't know. Maybe you have a different opinion of him because he's on your team, but I'm a little disappointed in what he's produced so far.
Well, it's kind of got to the point where, for me, because he's my third running back, and obviously the two guys I have ahead of him are just, yeah, I don't even worry about their scores, even though Zeke hasn't ran the ball as much, but we talked about the Dallas offense before. Yeah, it's the kind of thing, and particularly with the way that the running back injury situation has been, I'm like, hey, he's healthy. That's good enough for me at this point. Like that's kind of where it is for at least my third running back. As long as he remains healthy to plug in during Cook's and Zeke's bye weeks, that's yeah. As long as he's not losing um, his starting job, if whoever the backup is in Chicago takes his job because of this poor start, then I'd consider dropping him or doing whatever with them. But yeah, at this point, I can be patient with him because I've got better options, and my team is very healthy, so I can be patient at the moment.
And another
The touchdown is a good sign of things to come.
yeah, no, and for sure, it's just like I say, I predicted a little bit better things for him, but again, we're only in the first quarter of the season, and one more before we move on here, and this might shock a few people, but Drew Brees has been a little bit lackluster. Yes, you lose Michael Thomas, and you could say what you want here, but I'm just going to speak my piece. Um, he's played 4 games this year, so he's played Tampa Bay, Vegas, Packers, and Detroit. He has only broken 20 points once, and that was against the Packers. You think with that Tampa Bay, he won 34-23, and he only threw for 160 yards. Um, I just don't know what's going on there. And to your point earlier about the disappointment in Emmanuel Sanders, you think Emmanuel Sanders, and I'm not putting him on Michael Thomas's level, but when you lose that wide receiver, Breeze still has to throw the ball to somebody.
Yeah,
You think Sanders' numbers would go up, therefore Drew Brees' numbers would go up. But Drew has two interceptions. He's getting pressured lots. I know Devil Raiders. We were talking the other day at work, and he's just disappointed in what Brees has done. I'm not sure if you see anything different in regarding Brees. Normally, that's like the godsend, right? You don't talk bad about Brees, but his numbers, like you've seen what he's done in previous years. Through the first quarter, he has not jumped off a fantasy page.
yeah, and I guess I hope you're not wearing your Drew Brees jersey when you're saying this. You might have to wash it afterwards. But but yeah, I mentioned it in my rankings when I talked about Devil Raiders. I kind of mentioned that Breeze is he's kind of past his fantasy prime, if you will. Now now again, we do want to make sure that everyone who's listening, all three of them, understand that that we're not saying that Breeze is done as a valuable quarterback, and we're definitely not raining on his career or even his recent career. We are just saying what we see as far as fantasy. He's not the fantasy stud he once was, and the stats prove that. So don't get jumping on us because we're not calling him a bum. That's for sure.
No, and that's just it. We're just looking at disappointments through what we've seen, and obviously it's tough. It's going to make a lot of things different, especially with all the injuries we just spoke of. It forces guys to change the way they operate, and of course, that's going to do different things to fantasy. Some up, some down. But anything else you want to add before we move on to a new topic here?
No, no, not really. I got my disappointments, and there's obviously there could be a ton more. It doesn't take far to look at it, but we're also going to be talking about something similar to that in the next segment. So why don't we move on to that one?
Sounds good. Speaking of your point about Breeze, not saying he's completely done, but there are players who I think are normally picked based on past experiences, past production, maybe their name, what maybe you had a sentimental value to them, fantasy wise, so to speak. But what we're looking at here is fantasy retirement. And what we mean by that is what fantasy guys are normally picked. You could probably look at any league. I bet you these guys are on rosters. And should they be on a roster? Is it time to officially say goodbye to these people? And next year, when we get the stickers, do they not even make it to the table? Um,
Yeah,
because sometimes people pick, and we're going to find out. So let's just start with one here. AJ Green. This guy has been on Washington Oilskins roster for the first 3 years he was in the league. Drafted him, looking for production, constant disappointment, continued disappointment, riddled with injury. Bring in multiple quarterbacks, change their run game, create play action. Their defense wasn't that bad, but fantasy wise, AJ Green has just slowly moved to the back of the bus, and I think it's time. Guys still might pick him up just due to his name, but for me, if it was mine, I'm never I wouldn't pick him up and I'd be getting him off my roster. So for me, AJ Green's a retire.
that's a very good pick. Yeah, yeah, I agree with you 100% on that. He used to be a pretty big name. You, yeah, and yeah, he's not anymore. He's had a couple injury troubles. He hasn't been able to bounce back that well, and there are some new receivers in Cincinnati that are taking the mantle.
He has 12 points in 4 games.
Yeah,
It's bye bye
yeah.
Green. So is there who would be somebody you would think that would be a
Well,
fantasy retirement?
I've got someone that kind of comes. I guess you could say um, that this pick might be out of left field, or if you or to use fantasy terms, off the waiver wire, which is where you get this guy. Nobody drafts him, but he's on a lot of teams because he always gets picked up on waivers, and that's Ryan Fitzpatrick.
Hmm.
And yeah, this might surprise you a bit because you're like, well, what about Fitzmagic, and what about he's not doing too bad in Miami right now. the big problem with this is that he does about 3 or 4 good weeks a season. That's all he's good for. And he's kind of a Jekyll and Hyde thing where I have a little bit here. I have two nicknames for him. I have Fitz Magic and Fitz Aster. That, that's that's a play on Fitz Disaster, just in case you didn't know. That's like a Jekyll and Hyde guy. I said, what was it a couple years ago? Was it a couple years ago already with Tampa Bay where he came in and had
Yeah,
like 3 or 4 really great weeks at the beginning of the season, and then he disappeared, and now nobody drafts him? I said, this is why. I said, this is why I think he should just retire and just save us all the headache of when is he going to have his 3 good weeks and then fall off the map. And you know, I know I won't pick him up because well, it's just not worth it. He's just not consistent enough. But he's good enough to stay in the league every year.
oh for sure. And you know what? Actually, he helped me out last week. Played him as a starter, and not a great game, but got a touchdown, threw some yards, and ended up getting 23 fantasy points. And for a guy off the waiver wire who you don't really know, I'll take 23. But I see where you're going. I think Fitzpatrick is on his last legs, especially with Miami drafting your alma mater boy Tua, right? So eventually Tua is going to get in there. So I think you're right with that one. I'm going to continue with the wide receiver train here, and I think you'll agree with me with this one. And I've had him before, and I've traded him, and I've seen him get picked up and dumped, and then redrafted and dumped and traded. T.Y. Hilton
Mm.
had Andrew Luck. Things were rolling around in 2018, where he had his third highest reception yard season with 1,270. He's been in the league since 2012, and he's never cracked 8 touchdowns. So you can imagine, as your year goes on as a fantasy owner, you don't even get 8 touchdowns out of what would be or has been a wideout one, and his numbers have repeatedly gone down. He's had a few injuries, so we'll give him a break there. But he went from Andrew Luck to Philip Rivers. I mean, both quarterbacks can throw the ball. I just don't see the numbers there, and I just don't see any intention on grabbing him whatsoever. And unfortunately, as I say this, my last two guys are on the same roster, and it's Walter Sobchak. He he's got these guys. Oh, sorry, T.Y. Hilton's on Clueless. My next one's still with Walter Sobchak, but these are guys who I just don't see any improvement. I don't see any value to having them.
Well, yeah, and well, like don't worry about making the mistake on which team T.Y. Hilton's on because, like you mentioned earlier in your segment there, just give it a while. He'll get traded to someone else. I'm sure eventually he'll wind up on Walter Sobchak's team.
Exactly. Yeah, you just never know. But again, I think this is a name that, again, you think there's potential, and I think guys just grasp at straws again later rounds in the draft. Go, yeah, but the projections are, and then we go back to the projections, right? And here we are again.
Yeah,
Your projection slotted at the draft, and it never pans out. And there's a few guys that just aren't going to work out.
yeah.
So
Well, and Philip Rivers joining the Colts might have given some guys a little bit of hope. Well, maybe he'll return to that Andrew Luck part of his career, but like I said, it hasn't worked yet.
anyone else you think we should as fantasy owners hit the retirement and start the ceremony?
Well, one. I guess this guy, as a retirement uh, from fantasy and from the NFL in general, I think he's just had a rough go of it, and that's tight end Jordan Reed. And I know you're saying who is it? Well, like 3 or 4 years ago, this guy was supposed to be a really good tight end coming up. He had all this potential. He gets hurt every year, it seems, and it's bad injuries. Like he gets put out for the season all the time. And just put the rest of us out of his misery. Out of our misery. Don't even let us think about. Yeah, don't even don't even put him on the list because even if someone were to draft him, that's just a waste of an IR spot for him.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of tight ends, and I'm not even going to get into it because you should never draft this guy. Although I picked him up off the waivers. Is you know what? While we're getting mad at tight ends, you know what? Screw you, Jack Doyle. I know you're listening. So, anyways, that's just a couple different little segments there for who we think guys. I think it's time to say goodbye to. Maybe if they had a resurgence, who knows? Maybe later on in the year, next year, you pick them up off the waiver. But it just doesn't seem to be the value there, and we're just trying to help you guys out with a few names that I think are just going to hinder rosters. So that's a little bit of the retirement segment. And before we kind of wrap this episode up, we've had a little bit of busy in the trade value here. Hey, the trade market has been around, and there's been some
We had a
trades.
couple of trades, yeah.
Yeah,
A
so
couple of draft picks moving around with these ones too in here. So
yeah, so let's just go back a little bit here and take a look at a few trades before we stop here. So I think where we have here would be well, there we go. See, I didn't even realize this was a trade. To be honest, we're going maybe back a little bit. I don't know if we missed this one, but T.Y. Hilton got traded for Devin Singletary. Clueless got him from global warming. Obviously, global warming needed a running back. Clueless has been tight for wide receivers. I know he's still been thirsty for a couple. But there you go, right? Just to my point, without even realizing that. It's a guy who's drafted that just didn't pan out, and guys are moving on. You don't have time. There's only 13 weeks for everybody, right?
mm-hmm.
Unless you make the playoffs. So you got to move quick, and if guys aren't performing, it's time to move on from them. So I don't. I think that trade was just for value on what guys think they could get.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and as far as wide receivers, like there's more on each team than there are running backs. Like like running back committees are not that valuable, but wide receiver committees can still be somewhat valuable, as the Dallas Cowboys have shown, and as my guy CeeDee Lamb has shown. So it's a lot easier to find a wide receiver than a running back, especially this year. Running backs are a hot commodity. If you can get a trade for running back, you go for it, especially if he's a starter.
For sure. So the next trade was one between myself and the Connor role. That was basically just preemptive to the COVID rule. So there really isn't much there. That was just helping each other out.
Mm-hmm.
The next big one though was a big one, and let's break this down a little bit. There was two big ones here actually, but the first one was Clueless received Kyler Murray, Miles Gaskin, and Hayden Hurst from Global Warming, who received Latavius Murray, Matthew Stafford, and Le'Veon Bell. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, when I saw this, I almost pulled over into a ditch and phoned Ryan, and I did phone Ryan and say, what were you doing? Because, in my opinion, just on paper, without knowing the intentions behind the trade, global warming did not do well in this trade. Clueless offloaded Stafford, who's been nothing but a liability forever, fantasy wise.
Mm-hmm.
Le'Veon Bell, who should be dominant, has obviously just gone cuckoo since leaving Pittsburgh and has been hurt. And Latavius Murray is a backup to what arguably could be the best running back in the game, Alvin Kamara. Allen received a way better quarterback in Kyler Murray, a running back who has been Miami's best running back, and a tight end in Atlanta who is another piece to that trade. After speaking with Ryan, it turned out that the running backs he received are potential trade bait or running back depth, of course, as we just spoke about numerous times with COVID. So hearing him out, I get it, but in my opinion, Clueless won this trade pretty easily.
Yeah, it does appear to it at first. I know he didn't have this news. Ryan didn't have this news at the time the trade was made, but I'm just looking at Le'Veon Bell's update, and there was an update today that said he's been practicing this week and could be activated for Sunday's game against Arizona. So, and I also see that he has a plus 4% pickup rate in the last day. So, uh, teams in other leagues around Yahoo Fantasy are picking him up, slowly picking him up, the ones that didn't have him. So, yeah, the fact that he's coming back will make him better trade bait. But you're right. If this was a trade deadline and you weren't allowed to trade after this, it would not be a good trade for Ryan. But if he can flip some of these players and flip some of these running backs, like like we've said a million times, running backs are a prime commodity. If you don't have them, you need them, and he might be able to make some moves with that one. You know, he loves to trade, and he's not afraid to trade just to flip the guy like he has shown in this one.
Yeah, no, for sure. And obviously, we look ahead to the next trade, which was again global warming and myself. Um, Global Warming received Devontae Parker, Darren Waller, Dan Bailey, and an eighth round from Screaming Beavers. And I received Devin Singletary, TJ Hawkinson in a sixth round. Now, before I say why this transpired, you give me your opinion on this trade.
Okay, I can see where this obviously helps you, uh, especially with Chubb being hurt. You needed a starting running back, and and one that at least has the potential to carry your team, because the two guys you had to carry your team are both, um, well, Barkley's done for the year, and I think Chubb is done for 4 to 6 weeks at least, something, unless there's been a new update. But he's done for a while, so you needed a running back. You had to give up someone. Waller was the main guy you gave up, but at least you moved up in the draft next year, which is always kind of um, which is always a good backup plan for I'll call it a desperation trade like this, because if this trade doesn't work out for you, well, you know what, then this year is lost, and at least you get a better start next year with an extra six rounder.
Yeah, no, and that's kind of where it went. I basically needed a running back. Darren Waller was a piece he wanted. Devontae Parker was a complementary piece to the trade, and just flipping me back Hawkinson, although on the bye this week, allows me to not be too far behind my gap in Darren Waller because Stafford actually likes Hawkinson and he's not bad. Um, he also needed a kicker. That's why Dan Bailey's in there. But yeah, to get the sixth round pick helped. I know global warming upgraded in the tight end, got a little bit of a wide receiver depth. Devontae Parker's done a few numbers. Who knows what Ryan will do? I'm sure he'll probably flip both those guys before the year is done. But in my opinion, it worked out on what we both wanted, and we got the trade done. So, like you say, getting those picks on certain trades can help you if it goes south for the rest of the year for sure. And then the last trade, Man Bear Pig is alive. I told you guys he's real. He came to the draft. He does trade. Uh, I received Debo Samuel from him, and Man Bear Pig received Brian Edwards. It was a simple wide receiver trade. Knowing Debo was coming off the IR, I took a chance. Brian Edwards, although has been questionable, there's a lot of promise there for a young rookie wide receiver. Who knows where this trade will go? It's pretty much just flipping it, and we'll see what we can do with the wide receivers. So I obviously I like the trade. I'm sure Jerry does too. That's why he accepted it. But other than that, it's basically just a peace movement.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. These are two wide receivers who both have the questionable tags on them. They're both basically coming back from injury. Although I think Samuel has, I think he already played, although his use was somewhat limited. And Edwards, uh, uh, he might be playing. He's got a couple, they got a couple of days. They haven't had an update since last week on him. He might be coming back, but he should be close to coming back. So yeah, these are more of good young depth wide receivers that could take a step forward once they get healthy. So it's too early to say now who won this trade.
And breaking news as we finish our trades. Breaking news here for the NFL. Broncos Patriots game will now be is now on Monday. Was Sunday is now Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern, and Sunday's Bills versus Titans game will now be played Tuesday at 7 o'clock Eastern. We are going to have Tuesday football.
Yeah. Well, one more. We'll get Wednesday football, and then we got to get Friday and Saturday in there somewhere so we can watch football all week, and we won't know where 1 week starts and the next begins.
So just a friendly thing here before we sign off, because guys are gonna panic when they see or hear this. Yahoo has posted on our page, Broncos Patriots move to Monday, October 12th. This game will remain Week 5. Bills Titans move to Tuesday, will remain Week 5. Okay, guys, so there's nothing to panic about there. If you're worried about those guys, they will play. Well, unless there's something else, but it will remain for this Fantasy Weeks matchup, okay?
Yeah, and a free tip here: keep a close eye on your on any injury updates that might happen for these for any of your players on these teams, because if you've got a player that's playing on Tuesday and you don't know if they're going to play or not, there is no other game. Just like a Monday nighter, there's no other game that you can plug someone in unless you pick someone up. So keep a close watch um, on those injury reports.
That's
We'll make
right.
sure we all do. We're all legit GMs here.
That's right, guys. Well, again, a little bit of a heavier episode here. Lots to discuss as we missed one there, but hope you guys enjoyed it. Like we say, Thursday night's been underway here, so week five's underway. Good luck to you guys in your matchups this weekend, and we'll talk to you guys next week.
All right. See you guys later. Let's go watch the fourth quarter.